Greetings. I am the guardian of the Accomack tribe and people. I'm here to tell you the hidden truth that you need to know about the Indigenous Accawmacke Indians of Virginia. First of all, the tribe is located in Virginia on the eastern shore, which is considered the Delmarva. That peninsula, of course, it's a peninsula, so it's surrounded by water. It's surrounded by the bay on one side and the sea on the other. Of course, most explorers and any traders, and they were traders for thousands and thousands of years coming through Virginia. You know, the Americas was not a new world. It was a world well known to the rest of the entire world. This whole settlement, or the exploration of the Anglos, was about profit. And the Accamacks were the only Indians that actually helped the survival of all various settlements, because we were very generous and we sent provisions to Jamestown and to other settlements that helped them thrive and survive, whereas others were trying to get rid of the settlers or the immigrants. We did so, and the reason I say that we have a very hidden truth is that we did so to our detriment. We did so to even betray our other Indians, like our other fellow people of our chiefdom were planning a war, and we actually let the Jamestown settlement know that this attack was going to occur. I mean, that's, terrible. It's being treasonous, actually. But it's treasonous to the point that that's how much we did for this nation. And the fact that we were a tribe that did so much for the nation, the first tribe to actually support the development of this nation, and yet we're the first ones to be placed on a reservation and have that reservation taken away. That's what is so alarming about our history. So you may ask why I say Indian. I say Indian because Indian attaches you to the colonial period. Indian attaches you to the landmass. Okay, so in various places, whether it's this New Zealand or the Americas, the first people they saw, they called Indians. It was a term used to connect you to being indigenous. And it's the terms used in treaties, terms used that founded our reservation. So you have to use the terms that are connected to the history and to the people and to the laws. Most importantly, the laws. There are the laws that apply to Native Americans did not apply to us back in the 1600s. So when you're looking at historical laws, you got to use the historical terminology, okay? But as far as our history and the fact that we did help them, I want to explain it, because it wasn't that we were just like treasonous, like people that just didn't go along with our chiefdom. We are a people that are a part of the Powhatan chiefdom. Chief Powhatan was our chief, the chief over the chiefdom. Our chief, we had our own chief. Our chief Debedaron, also called the laughing chief. He was over our eastern shore. In the eastern shore, like I said, it was very much separate. So because it was separate, you had to do things that were different. I mean, we were subjected to Blackbeard. Blackbeard actually lived and was always on the eastern shore with us. So we had to, be subjected to pirates robbing, taking, raping. We had a lot of intruders that could come in on big ships and attack and, do things. So we had to kind of negotiate our lifestyle accordingly. I mean, although being a part of a chiefdom and also part of the Eastern Cherokee Nation, which extends from Pennsylvania all the way down to parts of Alabama and out all the way to Kentucky, definitely Tennessee. So that Cherokee Nation was huge. The Powhatan chiefdom, it was across the water. And across the water is a long way to come to get help or try to get somebody to help you. So we had to do things very independently, although we did pay tribute to King Powhatan. We had to make decisions that were a little different. In addition to that, let me be clear. Although there was the John Smith story with Pocahontas, and Pocahontas, by the way, her sister is who our chief married. Meta was her sister, and our chief, Debadera, married Pocahontas's sister. So that's how closely related we were, indeed. But with that being the truth, we were in relation. We had to do things that were independent, and we did have respect for King Powhatan. And King Powhatan had the same kind of mentality. He made quotes talking about the fact that why make war? We should show love to each other. And so, and that might have been in his older years, quite frankly, but it was his meaning and his thought, nonetheless, though it said. But there was a very spirit of giving, a spirit of helping that was among the Powhatan people in general. But as we saw that these settlers weren't just traders, and they were staying, and not only were they staying, they were taking too much. They were needy, they were sickly, they were killing us with disease, and they were just extremely greedy. They were using up our stores of corn, which we didn't store as that much. We stored enough to need. We were not a trading mogul nation. We were not trying to make profits across the world. We were just trying to get enough to sustain us, and so we didn't use nature in that way. Whereas they were just coming and using and trying to trade and bring things back to England, and it just depleted, especially those on the mainland who didn't have the same kind of environment. They didn't have the water, the ocean on both sides, the ocean and the bay on either side. They didn't have the great forests and the great, hunting lands and farmlands that the Eastern Shore had. The Eastern Shore had farmland and great hunting. So there was an abundance there that was kind of unique to the entire, area of Virginia. That also made us the very unique, having all this abundance on the Eastern Shore. And the Eastern Shore is still an abundant place, although it's very depressed and very, stricken with, it's very sad, depressed, and it seems to be cursed, because a beautiful place like that should not be in the condition that it's in, other than all the atrocities they have wreaked upon our people. It is a place that's full of suffering and sadness. The Accomacks were on the lands that were in relation to the Pamunkeys and the Mattaponi. They were across the water, but they were still like our cousins, and we also did marry. It's the same example I gave you of King Devon's wife being from Chief Powhatan's family. Our tribe's lands were taken away in abundance, despite the fact that we did so much to help. And it was said that we were more Negro, and we had mixed with African. Well, not at that time did they say Africans, but they said we were more Negro than Indian. The misnomer here being the fact that Indians were always Negro in appearance. We always were said to have different textured hair, curly, dark skin, and the fact that Negras or Negroes were not even transported to Virginia in large numbers at all, not during the entire 400 years of slave trade and servitude. There weren't very many. As a matter of fact, everyone knows about the 16, 19, 20 Negras. Really, it was said Negras, which meant they were females, which meant they were probably good for farming, because in our culture, the women did the farming, the men did the hunting. So They also had Spanish names, and they were actually stolen from a slave ship that was in Barbados that was Spanish. So, I mean, they weren't from Africa. So the fact that today they say they were from Africa is a blatant lie. And if you look in the old historic books, of which I have several, you will see that they were not African. Never was that word used. As a matter of fact, in the slave trade, they didn't use African. They would say specifically where they were from, just like people who are from the continent do today. They say, I'm from Nigeria, or I'm from, Liberia. They don't say, I'm from Africa. They would say, we got the slave from the Congo. We got the slave from Angola. They would say exactly where they got the slave from. If you look in old documents, that African terminology was very rarely used. And so, that being the case, and the fact that basically the slave trade, as they said, was not as much as what they had tried to make us believe, that only less than 250 some slaves were actually transported to North America for the whole entire period of servitude. That would mean that only, like, in some places, in some colonies, only 80 some slaves came for the 400 years of slavery. That's crazy. 80 slaves, that's like a couple of classrooms of kids. Think about that. Anyway, the Powhatan chiefdom disappeared. That's the other thing. All these different tribes, there were many tribes. Even within the Accomacks, there were sub-tribes. Well, the Powhatan chiefdom, if you go from 1607, when the settlers or Anglo immigrants first arrived, it disappeared. All these different tribes just boop, 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 boop came off the map from like the 20-year period, okay? Yet, miraculously, the Negro population grew by hundreds and hundreds of thousands. How do you account for this sudden increase of Negroes and no accounting for the disappearance of the Indians? I mean, quite frankly, if the Indians were all disappeared from sickness, they would have been gone like pretty immediately. It doesn't take long. Being a RN for 30 some years, I can tell you that if you're gonna die and you die of the horrible things that they died from, it wasn't like a long process. They died pretty quick. That would have been an initial thing, and then immunity would have been built up. People would have been okay. Wouldn't have been an issue. Blah blah blah. So the fact that you have all these Indians gone and all these Negroes all suddenly appearing, and the fact that the original people that explored the Americas, North America specifically, Virginia specifically, said that our people were chestnut brown to tawny. Did not mention our hair being straight at all, mention our eyes being jet black, mention our hair being mostly black, jet black, or black. Why would you not think that there were already Negro people there? Why would you not believe that the indigenous people of Virginia were Negro in appearance? Everything that is written says we were, and we were. Let me also talk about the fact that we had many bands just in the Eastern Shore. A lot of people equate the survivors or descendants of the Accomacks with this reservation that was made. This good old reservation was only 1,500 acres. And I know that sounds like a lot to people, but let me put it in perspective. Ensign Savage was a immigrant that was given to the Accomacks as a guide or a interpreter or someone to learn the culture. This young man was said to be given 500 to 500,000 acres as a gift from the king. Now, of course, the idea of giving land and someone owning land in totality was not a custom or a law of the people that were Accomack. We did not give away land. People did not own land. So this is a false statement and a false transaction. Okay, but I won't get into that. However, the reality is that's the thing. One man given 5,000 acres as opposed to a whole nation or a whole tribe being given 1,500 acres. Let's be real. Our own major king Debbie Devon, did not coincide with the chiefdom. So his sub-tribes, they were probably the same way, like-minded, independent thinkers, people that kind of made their own decision for their sub-tribe or their clan. The fact that this reservation was started did not mean that everybody just trekked to the reservation. No, we had several bands. As a matter of fact, I have books that actually outline many of those names and their chiefs' names. The Magathas, the Nassawatucks, the Matawamis band or sub-tribe. There were multiple clans within each band or sub-tribe too. Our different bands and clans are supported by many different documentation. There were many sub-tribes, many bands. As far as the most important text that I refer to is Ye Kingdom of Accomack. That was written in the 1811, but actually refers back to the early 1700s, 1600s. And there were other branches, many branches, but the ones that I stuck out in my mind were the ones that relate to my family, mainly the Magathas. Also, there were Matawamis, there were Nassawatucks. The Nassawatucks were at Elliot's Neck under King Tepeanpan. And then we had the Matawanos who were at Hunger's Neck, and they had their own king as well that was mentioned. So these would be our relatives that were right there on the Eastern Shore in their own little nest, in their own little communities, okay? Please believe everybody in their individual sub-tribes and bands did not necessarily join a reservation. That was probably started because it was a prison camp. I mean, the start of the reservation was actually coincides with the end of that major war that ended in 1632. Then you get a reservation in 1640. Hello, it was probably a slave imprisonment camp, which they took the prisoners of war and turned them into slaves, or got them together, divvied them out to people by auction or whatever, and that's most likely how that reservation started. Later, it was converted to lots that were allotted to people to say, get off of this good land and come over here and live now. And, that existed, that reservation, from 1640 until 1813 when they were pretty much disbanded and the Virginia Assembly removed our reservation. There were, and this was because there was a lot of pressure from the locals for land. They wanted the land. And so they got it. That being the case, let's be clear about this. The land was about profit. And the people were there not to be good Christians and help the Indians. They weren't there because they needed a good life of freedom. They wanted profit. The Virginia, if you look back to my information that I showed about the peninsula was at first a free land called, Accomack. You fast forward from 1607 to 1627, and you will see my picture that says Accomack Plantation. The entire peninsula was a plantation for profit, and greed. And let me tell you, when they came here and you look at the very old works, the old diaries, the old accounts, the old logs, they say they're looking for everything, every plant, every mineral. They are looking for what they can make money for. They actually drew pictures, and that's why we have pictures of the people and pictures of the plant life and everything, because they were looking and sending back to their investors these pictures and this information. We can make money off of this for dye. We can make money for this because it's a good spice. We can make money off of the tobacco because it's fun. I mean, we can make money off the salt. They even had a plantation called Dale's Gift, in which they were boiling like 200 to 300 gallons of salt water to produce salt, and they were taken from a plantation to do so, and they worked like all day through the night doing that. It was a very dangerous occupation, and yes, it was all for profit. Everything about this new world was a profit. It wasn't love of freedom and justice for all. It was about profit for few. And the people that were taken here as indentured slaves, they were for profit too. So what I want to say is, this is the true tale of what began this country. This country was started on the generosity of a few, which led to the profit and the success of many. And the same people that made it possible for the success of this country had their land and their lives and their rights and their identity ripped away from them. And the ripping away of the true identity of the indigenous people is how this country began. Next time when I do another video, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how this successfully was done, how we were actually transformed as a people that were Indian to people who were not, how our lands were taken away, and how it was possible that we actually forgot. I also want to talk about, in the future, a little bit about Nat Turner. Also, I'd like to talk about African Americans and, the African slave trade and what indigenous people actually did look like in another video. I'd also would like to talk about how, what we ate, our lifestyle, some of our natural cures and the things practices that we had in a very light form. And also talk about indigenous farming. I like to share that and indigenous pottery making in future videos. So I hope you like and subscribe. In addition, if there's anything you'd like to know about, if you have any questions, or if you need to correct me on something, please leave it in the comments and I'll be glad to address it in a future video. Thanks.